Psychopath: Exploring the Mental Depths of the Psychopath Mind. Written by Albert Rogers. Narrated by Ramon Lopez. Introduction. Psychopathy and sociopathy are two personality disorders commonly linked to serial killers or criminals. In truth, however, there is so much more to psychopaths and sociopaths than meets the eye. In this book, you will find out the true nature of this condition and the people who have it. By the end of this book, you should have a clear grasp of what causes psychopathy and what are the clear indicators that a person is a psychopath. More importantly, this book will teach you how to prevent being manipulated by one. Chapter 1. What and who is a psychopath? Psychopaths have gotten lots of attention over the years, but very little information today is accurate. Considered as a personality disorder, psychopaths are often seen as cold-blooded serial killers or those who have the potential to become serial killers. This is not surprising considering how one of the most popular serial killers today, Ted Bundy, is dubbed as a psychopath. Still, others may argue that he is a sociopath instead. Psychopaths versus sociopaths. These two terms are often interchangeable, but there's actually a marked difference between them. While the science is still not exact, studies have narrowed down distinctions among the two. As to cause. It is generally accepted that psychopaths are born and not made. It is seen as a generic trait, pursuant to a Minnesota study about the condition. In contrast, sociopaths are made and not born. Sociopath tendencies usually occur due to environmental factors that severely impact a person's mindset. It can be anything from the early loss of parents to rejection by a loved one. As to education. While the condition is not indicative of intelligence, psychopaths typically have a good career and are well educated. In contrast, sociopaths are typically unable to hold down a steady job. It is also unlikely that they have reached tertiary education. Of course, there are certain exceptions to this. As to conscience, empathy. Psychopaths are generally accepted to have no conscience and lack empathy. This is perhaps the most defining characteristic of a psychopath. In contrast, a sociopath has little empathy. They have a conscience, but this is not exercised greatly. As a result, psychopaths form no attachment, although they may act like they do, while sociopaths form little attachments to certain groups or individuals. As to behavior. Psychopaths exercise excellent control in their own person and try to extend this to their surroundings. They are known to be highly manipulative, as opposed to sociopaths that suffer from erratic behavior. Sociopaths are more likely to be aggressive and violent. As to crime. Note that being a psychopath or sociopath is not tantamount to being a criminal. Those who do fall into a life of crime, however, tend to follow a general pattern for their acts. Psychopaths are meticulous and plan ahead, taking calculated risks and ensuring that the evidence is minimized if not wiped clean entirely. Sociopaths are more out of control and tend to commit violent or physical crimes. Nowadays, psychopaths are more geared toward organized crime, fraud schemes, and the like. Psychopath versus narcissist. Many people make the mistake of using these two terms interchangeably. There's actually a marked difference between the two in that all psychopaths are narcissists, but not all narcissists are psychopaths. Narcissism is a personality disorder recognized by DSM-5, or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It is characterized by a grandiose sense of self-importance and a need for excessive admiration from others. Narcissists may also lack empathy and believe that they are entitled to many things in life, even if they don't necessarily work for the same. Narcissists often fantasize about holding extreme amounts of money, power, control, beauty, success, and so on. They believe that they are unique and thus deserve to be looked up to by others. A narcissist is not necessarily a psychopath, since some of the characteristics of the psychopath may not be present in a narcissist. However, narcissism is an essential characteristic of a psychopath. The degree of narcissism also matters. Psychopaths often fall within the extreme scale of self-grandiosity, while some narcissists are not as excessive in their belief of self-importance. Psychopath versus antisocial personality disorder. Despite the apparent popularity of the terms psychopath and sociopath, it is interesting to note that both personality disorders are not mentioned in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. The recognized mental disorder that is closest to the definition of a psychopath is antisocial personality disorder. As a diagnosis, however, psychiatrists do not diagnose an antisocial personality disorder without a prior diagnosis of conduct disorder. Thus, professionals often make use of antisocial personality disorder instead of psychopath. Myths about psychopaths. Since psychopaths are often mistaken for serial killers, it's best to first get the myths out of the way. Here are some of the things you might have heard about psychopaths but aren't completely true. Psychopaths are insane. Psychopaths are not insane. They function perfectly well within society's boundaries but is differentiated in their way of thinking. Many psychopaths are actually upstanding members of society or have managed to make a success out of their lives. Psychopaths are criminals. A large portion of psychopaths end up as criminals due to their inability to control or properly manage impulses and the constant need for stimulation. As you'll learn later on, however, crime as a career is just one of the options a psychopath has for employment. There are currently jobs available that naturally attract the psychopath, and many of these are perfectly acceptable and even celebrated within society. You're either a psychopath or you aren't. Don't expect that all psychopaths are like Hannibal or Ted Bundy. Psychopathy actually exists on a spectrum, which means that while some characteristics of a psychopath are strong, some may be weak and therefore easily controlled. In fact, studies have shown that many of the past US presidents possess a level of boldness and assertiveness akin to that of psychopathy. It must be noted that this assertiveness is an important factor in what made them presidents. You can self-diagnose psychopathy. While there are definitely lots of online tests to help diagnose psychopathy, none of these are legitimate. For a proper diagnosis, individuals will have to go through a legitimate doctor for personality disorders. More often than not, it takes more than just a questionnaire to diagnose psychopathy. Nowadays, a brain scan can be made to better track the brain's response when asked questions. Psychopaths are dangerous. While many of the psychopath traits are negative, this does not automatically make them dangerous or violent. Be aware, however, that your mental health may be at risk, since psychopaths can easily break down a person's confidence and self-esteem. If you feel as though you're at risk when with a psychopath, it's often best to simply move away from them. Chapter 2. Signs and Characteristics of a Psychopath. The reason why these two personality disorders are often interchanged is because the basic characteristics of the two are remarkably similar. However, there are certain characteristics that are unique to psychopath. In this chapter, we'll talk about the traits that are unique in psychopaths as well as those common with sociopaths. There's typically a 20-point character basis that professionals use to check, but bear in mind that a perfect score is not necessary for a diagnosis. Some confirmed psychopaths lack several characteristics, but there are some that are never gone from the list. Lack of empathy, remorse, guilt. This is the most defining characteristic of a psychopath. Thus, it can be said that all psychopaths lack empathy. Empathy is the ability to connect with people and put yourself in their position so that you can sympathize with them on an emotional level. Empathy is the reason why people donate food to the homeless, say sorry after a mistake, and feel bad for doing something wrong. It is the ability to recognize pain in someone, and psychopaths do not have this ability. For this reason, psychopaths are primarily incapable of connecting with people or forging relationships. Note, though, that this is an internal characteristic and most psychopaths are smart enough to fake empathy. Lying pathologically. Psychopaths are also pathological liars in that they have this compulsive need to lie in order to suit their own ends. Sometimes there isn't even any good reason for the lie as long as they find it convenient to give them. Psychopaths can be quite adept in their lies, especially when it is part of their grand scheme. Being meticulous, some of their lies are well thought of and thus hard to pinpoint. Superficial charm. Of all the characteristics of psychopaths, charm is perhaps the most surprising one of all. Psychopaths have the amazing ability to coax people into their way of thinking, exuding an appeal that can be attractive for most people. While some psychopaths are not as accomplished in faking the genuineness of their charm, there are those that are more than capable of fooling the public. Ted Bundy, infamous serial killer and psychopath, was so proficient in exercising charm that women happily supported him during his trial for murder. Manipulative. Together with charm is their ability to manipulate people. Combine this with their lying capacity and psychopaths can be excellent puppet masters. In fact, studies show that there are lots of psychopaths in top fields of business and politics, two careers that require a certain combination of appeal for success. Promiscuous behavior. Their lack of guilt or remorse makes it easy for psychopaths to go beyond societal boundaries without thinking twice about it. This is why many psychopaths have no problem being in several relationships at once, even if they are already married. They are promiscuous and their manipulative character makes it easy for them to juggle several relationships all at once. Inflated sense of self-worth. They believe that they are better than others in almost every aspect, which is a narcissistic trait. Psychopaths need to be smarter than everyone else, stronger than everyone else, earn more than anyone else, drive a better car, and so on. They are of the opinion that they are always right and will therefore have a hard time accepting mistakes or criticisms. Blaming others. Since psychopaths believe that they can never be wrong, it makes sense for them that someone else made a mistake. They always blame others and never accept responsibilities for mistakes or problems. On the flip side, if something good happens, they are quick to take credit. Constant need for stimulation. Studies have shown that psychopaths have a constant need for stimulation. This can be linked to the fact that they lack empathy and thus do not feel the same highs and lows of emotions associated with relationships. Psychopaths require a different manner in which to stimulate their senses. They have the tendency to lock down on a particular stimulation and go after it until they're satisfied. A problem is that, much like drug addicts, some psychopaths may need a bigger fix each time for stimulation to occur. This is why psychopaths, who are also murderers, often reach this level by steps. Other criminal behavior occurs before they commit murder. Chapter 3. The Mind of a Psychopath. Psychopaths are definitely getting loads of attention in the medical field with scientists, making them the focus of their study in an effort to fully understand morality and how it is processed in the brain. Psychopaths seem to be the most efficient specimen for this kind of research because they operate on a seemingly immoral plane, although not completely evil. Neuroscience of psychopathy. Perhaps one of the most prominent individuals in the field of psychopathy is Robert Hare, who conducted some of the most quoted studies regarding the psychopath mind. The author of several books about the subject, some of his most persuasive works are written in the psychopath theory, research, and practice. During the 80s, Hare operated a study whereby Cleckley's theory was tested in subject psychopaths. The theory is that psychopaths have no grasp of the emotional components of language. More to the point, psychopaths only see language as purely linguistic and do not come with emotional attachments as opposed to other people. For example, a normal human being would have an emotional response to words like genocide, murder, love, and belonging. A psychopath will not be able to feel the underlying emotions typically attached to the said words. Combined with recent discoveries of different portions of the brain and their role to cognitive function, the study was able to confirm this theory by subjecting known psychopaths to a linguistic test. Psychopathic subjects and a control group were hooked up to an EEG where their brain activity was tracked to find out if there was a difference in which portions light up in the brain, depending on the word uttered by the researcher. According to Hare, while most people can differentiate between emotional and neutral words, the psychopath has no such capacity. Their brain response to both emotional and neutral words is the same. This study has been replicated by numerous researchers with the same results. This suggests that the psychopathic condition is not just a mental one but also a physical one. The brain of a psychopath literally functions differently from that of a typical human being. Adding to the growing understanding of psychopaths on a neurological level is Kent Keel, who is a student of the Hare Lab. For his part, Keel not only replicated the study but also went to interview psychopaths in order to gain a better understanding of the subject. After more than 5,000 brains scanned over a period of years, Keel has come to the conclusion that psychopathy is a neurodevelopmental disorder. He found that those diagnosed as psychopaths have functional and structural anomalies in the blood flow which affects cognition, impulse control, and emotions. The value of understanding the psychopathic mind. The primary reasoning for the extensive studies on psychopaths rests on the possibility of curing the condition. However, that doesn't mean that current developments about these fields of study are essentially useless at this point in time. Brain scans are currently being conducted in courtrooms with the hope of proving that some criminals are not criminally responsible for their actions. Case in point is the 2009 trial of Brian Duggan, where Keel was hired by the defense team. It was in their interest to showcase that Duggan had a neurological disorder through his brain scans, with the goal of impacting the decision of the jury against the death penalty. While the decision became moot as death penalty was abolished in the state, it was believed that the case is only a starting point to the role neuroimaging will play in criminal trials. Keel is of the opinion that the procedure to categorize psychopaths will be as revolutionizing as the use of DNA in trials. Categorization. It is interesting to note that many of the psychopaths' overt characteristics are somehow desirable to people. Their charm, amazing capacity to socialize, their attentiveness, and their determination are characteristics that many people will happily have. This is why there are studies that do not necessarily paint the psychopath on their bad light. In fact, there is a theory put forward that psychopaths are a different type of human that was produced through an evolutionary process due to the hard pressures of life. Following this theory, it may be argued that the lack of a conscience or empathy is a natural progression from man's current state. Whether you find such notions plausible or not is entirely up to you. Chapter 4. Role of Conscience in Psychopath. Conscience, or lack thereof, is the most defining feature of a psychopath. Conscience is defined as an inner feeling or voice viewed as acting as a guide to the rightness or wrongness of one's behavior. It is a moral compass that facilitates feelings of guilt and remorse whenever you, by your own standards, do something perceived to be wrong or immoral. Psychopaths do not have this inner voice and thus, by extension, do not feel any guilt or remorse. After all, guilt usually comes to a person by way of an inner voice that tells them that what they did is wrong. There is no such voice in a psychopath. Why is conscience important? In order to fully understand the impact of a lack of conscience, it is important to underline why conscience is such an integral part of the human psyche. This need for the existence of an inner moral compass is the foundation of society. After all, man is a social animal, which makes it necessary to get along with others for sex and sustenance to become possible. Every time a person acts, he compares it with his perceived norms, figures out whether anyone will be offended by his actions, weighs it against his personal interests, and makes a decision whether or not to do it. Essentially, this is a 5-step process. 1. What will I do? 2. Is it good or bad? 3. Who will be affected? 4. What benefit will I get? 5. Will I do it? The second question takes into account a person's conscience, while the third question answers the question of empathy. A normal human being will put great stock into the answers to these questions and put them into consideration when making a decision. Why? Because man is a social animal and there is an innate need to be part of society. To divert from the norm or to do something that will elicit a negative response would put one's position in society in jeopardy. In contrast, the psychopath's mindset is a little different. This is not to say that he or she does not know what's wrong or what's right, or how will this affect people. A psychopath knows what's right and wrong. Furthermore, he or she also knows how actions will affect society. But a psychopath just doesn't care. During the trial of serial killer Dennis Rader, also known as the BTK killer, stands for bind, torture, kill, he confessed to his strong detachment during the murders, noting that his victims, 10 in all, were just inanimate objects that are to be used for his treasure. This connotes that the psychopath mind puts more attention into the fourth question: what benefit will I get? Psychopath's recognition of a conscience. What makes a psychopath an even better manipulator is the fact that, While he has no conscience, he usually recognizes the existence of a conscience in others. One technique they use to manipulate is reminding you of your apparent moral responsibilities and what you should be doing. It does not matter whether they believe in those moral precepts themselves, as long as what they say or do coaxes you into agreeing with what they want to happen. Psychopaths happily make use of guilt against other people and will often find a way to lay the blame on you, even though that ultimate mistake is actually theirs. Therefore, they are the ones who constantly remind others of the mistakes or failures that are being made. Chapter 5. What causes psychopathy? As previously mentioned, it is commonly accepted that psychopaths are born the way they are, as opposed to sociopaths that are made through environmental factors. However, the truth is that the scientific community is still in the process of studying personality disorders, including psychopathy and sociopathy. Thus, this generally accepted cause is not exact and may change over time. When you look at a lot of serial killers with psychopathic tendencies, it is interesting to notice the abuse or neglect in their childhood and the little chances they stood in society to lead a happy and fulfilling life with the traumas they had faced thus far anyway. The study of these personality disorders are seen to have a strong link in a person's morality or his perception of good and evil. Thus, some are of the opinion that understanding how the psychopath's brain works can make it possible for scientists to control the moral switch and essentially cure or prevent psychopathy. Today, there are several possibilities as to the cause of psychopathy. Genetic. It is widely believed that psychopathy is a genetic trait, which means that children of psychopaths are also more likely to become psychopaths. There are many presumed psychopathic serial killers who are related to each other and work together when killing others. A classic example is sisters Delfina and Maria de Jesus Gonzalez, known to be the most prolific murderous partnership with a body count of 91. The number is said to be a combination of men, women, and even children. Of course, studies show that the genetic disposition is also influenced by environmental factors. Hence, those who have psychopathic tendencies may not display all the signs and symptoms of the personality disorder unless they undergo some form of emotional trauma. Emotional trauma. Emotional trauma can come in many forms such as abuse by parents, lack of familiar ties, rejection, feelings of isolation, neglect, and physical abuse. Ted Bundy, serial killer psychopath, found out that his sister was actually his mother. He was also rejected by a woman he liked, leading him to kill numerous women who oddly enough looked a lot like the woman who rejected him. Such a childhood might have triggered more apathy and violence towards women, along with the severe pornography addiction he confessed to have. Children who were sexually abused or severely punished may also grow up to become psychopaths due to the presence of these environmental factors. Substance abuse. There are also theories and some studies backing up the probability that substance abuse can lead to psychopathy. This includes alcohol and drugs, the latter being able to alter the mind or create sufficient damage that leads to psychopathy. It may also be argued that parents who did not properly care for the child before birth can lead to psychopathy. For example, a woman who takes drugs while pregnant will affect the child's brain development, leading to one form of personality disorder. Physical trauma. There are also reports citing King Henry VIII as a psychopath due to his cruelty, especially to his two wives. However, King Henry VIII wasn't always cruel. His mood swings started when he suffered a physical trauma during a jousting accident. There are theories about the fact that the physical trauma, which led to comatose, affected the king's brain, thus turning him into a cruel man or what would be today termed as a psychopath. Other studies have also noted that some psychopaths or serial killers suffered through some sort of brain damage at some point in their lives. This is not a far-fetched theory considering how even certain infections can affect the brain and lead to some form of madness. Chapter 6. Cures, Therapy, and Treatment. The generally accepted view is that treatment of psychopaths does not work. It is widely believed that psychopaths, at least the adult ones, remain in such a way and will not be altered by therapy or any other type of human intervention. As will be discussed later, children who are considered to have the makings of a psychopath may be cured of the condition through early therapy. Treatments conducted and explored. Medical science has gone through numerous studies to understand the mind of a psychopath and find out how to cure or reverse the process. Some of the treatments that were used involve psychoanalysis, client-centered therapy, group therapy, psychodrama, electroconvulsive therapy, drug therapy, and psychodrama, all of which have done nothing to instill empathy in psychopaths. In fact, a study in 1991 shows that psychopaths who have undergone these therapies regressed or devolved so that they had a higher tendency towards violence as opposed to those who did not go through therapy at all. This study was observed among inmates, one of such participants even noting that the programs to cure psychopathy actually worked like a finishing school. Instead of reversing their mindset, it taught psychopaths how to better manipulate people. Cognitive therapy and anger management. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is one of the most common approaches to mental disorders. When tested among psychopaths or those with antisocial personality disorder, however, the results aren't as promising as expected. Due to the unique characteristics of the psychopath, it is incredibly difficult for therapists to properly apply the principles of CBT among patients. It must also be noted that those who underwent CBT are criminal psychopaths who had the intent of avoiding or minimizing jail time. This typically results to lack of true development towards improvement. Anger management, on the other hand, does not treat psychopathy but rather teaches the psychopath better control his or her impulsiveness and anger issues. While not all psychopaths have problems with controlling their anger, the criminal psychopath definitely has a hard time controlling the violent emotions. It is found that anger management helps psychopaths better acclimatize themselves in society. However, it does not increase their empathy or provide them with a conscience. Giving a psychopath chances. Some people like to lean toward hope and give a psychopath several opportunities or chances to change. The criminal prison system is largely hindered on this rationale, believing that if a person is punished enough, he or she will eventually change and become a useful member of society. Unfortunately, this is not always the case with criminal psychopaths. They are impulsive and believe that they are entitled to the things they want. Therefore, psychopaths are unlikely to learn from prison and tend to repeat the same pattern over and over again. This is why, despite various treatments, recidivism in criminal psychopaths remains high. Treatment of criminal psychopath. It is important to note that treatment is targeted toward the criminal psychopath. These are the psychopaths that have been diagnosed as such after being caught of committing a crime. They must be distinguished from successful psychopaths that seamlessly blended into society and have managed to take on traditional roles, be it in relationships and even start families. These successful psychopaths are largely undetected, or even if they showcase the characteristics of the personality disorder, they are not properly diagnosed by a professional. In some cases, successful psychopaths have managed to control the base characteristics so that they actually manage to work well with others, or, at the very least, to the line within being tolerable. Do psychopaths know they're psychopaths? One interesting question posted is whether psychopaths are aware of the fact that they are psychopaths. Diagnosed non-criminal psychopaths are often aware that there is something wrong in their inner workings. One question psychopaths admit to not really caring that 9/11 happened. There are those who do not feel anything or feel very little when confronted with events that typically cause other people to feel some sort of emotion or suffering. The BTK serial killer admitted that he did not see his kills as people and calls them his projects or subjects. A further interesting question is what happens when a psychopath is confronted with the fact that he or she is a psychopath. While research about this situation is not extensive, it has been noted that acknowledgement of having a personality disorder is not often enough to actually cure a person of psychopathy. Unlike other personality disorders, diagnosed non-criminal psychopaths can simply be taught to embrace this portion of the personality and learn to proceed through life with this knowledge. An argument toward the goodness of psychopathy. There are arguments today stating that being a psychopath isn't necessarily a bad thing. After all, studies have shown that those who have the qualities of a psychopath also make for excellent businessmen. It was argued that certain qualities of a psychopath can be useful for society, such as their assertiveness, their boldness, and that they tend to focus on the possibilities rather on what has happened. Most importantly, however, psychopaths rarely care about what other people think. Therefore, they respond less to peer pressure and will not be dampened by what others have to say about them, although this can make them angry with another person. Chapter 7. Psychopathic Children. Medically speaking, persons under the age of 18 cannot be properly diagnosed as psychopaths or sociopaths. Hence, children who meet all the criteria of a psychopath cannot be officially termed as such until they reach adulthood. For this reason, kids with all the hallmarks of a budding psychopath are exposed to treatment before they reach the age of 18. Budding psychopaths may seem far-fetched, but they are not entirely unheard of. In fact, a documentary on the phenomenon followed a young female child who displayed all the symptoms of psychopathy. Sexually abused even before she reached 7 years of age, the child showed symptoms of violence which includes 1. The killing of baby birds, 2. Attacking another child during sleep, 3. Pinning the family dog with a needle, and 4. Cutting another child with shards of glass. The documentary, named Child of Rage, features Beth Thomas and was made in 1989. Behaviors of budding psychopaths. The situation of Beth Thomas is far from being the only circumstance where a budding psychopath may be studied. However, it is one of the most documented and watched all over the globe. A chilling take on psychopathy. Many of those who watched the documentary were shocked, not just by her confession of the intent to kill her adopted parents, but also the calm manner in which she told the same. Beth Thomas showcased many of the behaviors today linked with budding psychopaths. Whether diagnosed young or during the teen years, the following are some of the behaviors that could signal psychopathy in adulthood. Shallow or lack of emotions. Children are naturally emotional and will often show this through their actions or facial expressions. Budding psychopaths, or BP, are less emotional and show little remorse or guilt. While there are those who are capable of faking their emotions, parents or adults can often sense this in the child. Becomes very angry when corrected. Despite their apparent lack of emotion, BPs have been known to become very angry when corrected. Much like adult psychopaths, they have little tolerance for criticism and are more likely to show their displeasure when corrected. They also have the tendency to blame others for their faults. Breaks promises frequently. Due to their lack of empathy and remorse, it is not uncommon for BPs to break promises often. While they will say sorry afterwards, the remorse is often insincere or faked, which many adults can undoubtedly sense. Injures or inflicts pains on animals or other children. Budding psychopaths start young in testing the extent of their empathy, or lack thereof. They tend to inflict pain on others and will do so in small increments as if testing the water and how far they can go with their experiments. Typically, however, BPs start with animals because these are unlikely to fight back or tell others. Starts fires. This is a typical sign often quoted in many criminal-centered television shows. Although not all BPs show this symptom, there has been a marked correlation between the two. Does not care about school. While budding psychopaths thrive on praises and love being seen as better than everyone else, they rarely care about schoolwork. This can be linked to the fact that they see themselves as superior to their peers and thus do not find the need to follow the rules. This level of self-importance often extends to adults, which means that budding psychopaths also do not care for the opinion of those older than them. But they do have the charm to act respectful or remorseful when in the presence of adults. Impulsive. They act without thinking and rarely plan ahead. While this characteristic can be argued as typical for children, budding psychopaths have no remorse when their actions cause harm to others. In fact, they tend to blame others for what happened. Breaks the rules. Lack of respect for authority combined with impulsiveness and lack of remorse lead a budding psychopath to rule breaking at an early age. Rule breaking may start with simple things, but gradually worsens as the child stretches or tests his or her limits. Treatment of budding psychopaths. While the story of child of rage Beth Thomas might seem hopeless, there's actually a happy ending to the story. Beth Thomas underwent therapy early on and is now a registered nurse. She is deemed healthy both physically and mentally without any lingering effects of her bad childhood. From this, it can be inferred that childhood psychopathy can be treated and cured, especially when caught early on. One of the latest works on treating budding psychopaths was conducted in 2001 through the use of decompression treatment. This is actually a combination of various theories and practices, all designed to eradicate or minimize psychopathic behavior. While the sample size is small compared to other personality disorders, there have been positive results. In the said study, budding psychopaths were grouped into 3 and given different types of treatment each. Those who received decompression treatment had the least percentage of rearrested members, only 10%, as opposed to the control group, those who received no treatment, where 70% of the members were rearrested. The third group, which was given group therapy, had a rearrest rate of 20%, which is twice the amount of the decompression treatment group. How long does treatment take? The main problem with therapy for budding psychopaths is the fact that it takes a long time for results to become evident. Decompression must be applied for months or even years for them to become effective, hence the present problems in their application. When applied in just a short period of time, budding psychopaths will still regress or worse, develop more violent tendencies. The fact of long-term treatment also takes its toll on the financial resources. In a study titled The Criminal Psychopaths, History, Neuroscience, Treatment, and Economics, it was found that the government can save approximately $150 billion per year if they stop decompression treatment to even just half of the incarcerated psychopaths today. Chapter 8. Spotting a Psychopath. Where are they? Where are the psychopaths? When examples of psychopaths are given, one usually talks about a famous serial killer. This gives the impression that all psychopaths are serial killers and vice versa, which is not the case at all. Many psychopaths do not resort to killing, but seek a different kind of mental stimulation. In fact, it is theorized that many of the top businessmen, politicians, and army generals today are psychopaths. In the book The Mask of Sanity, written by Hervey Cleckley, the author views psychopathy as a mental illness. It was discussed that if psychopaths feel anything, it is an extremely shallow version of the emotion people typically undergo. What is more interesting in this book is the classification of criminal psychopaths as unsuccessful psychopaths. This means that there are actually successful psychopaths in society today, but these are not the criminals who are not caught. Instead, these are the psychopaths that have managed to adapt and seamlessly exist within the perceived boundaries of society. These psychopaths are successful in masking the symptoms of the personality disorder and have managed to carve a niche for themselves in medicine, business, politics, and various other industries. In fact, it is theorized that there are psychopaths today working as psychiatrists. Spotting the psychopath. The basic characteristics of a psychopath have been discussed in a previous chapter of this book. However, these basic characteristics aren't always evident, or perhaps they are hard to notice unless you are a practiced psychiatrist. The everyday person who interacts daily with a psychopath may have a hard time diagnosing the condition based on the characteristics previously given. However, there are some subtle signs that are easier to recognize for those who deal with psychopaths on a daily basis. If you see any of these, chances are you're working with one. They contradict themselves. Psychopaths are pathological liars, but this doesn't mean that they are perfect when keeping track of their lies. You will therefore find that psychopaths contradict themselves from one point to the next. During one day, a psychopath may gush about how much he or she likes animals, but later on reveal the contrary. When confronted with a contradiction, a psychopath can easily create a glib response to settle the matter and to cover his or her mistake. Hot and cold feelings. When it comes to relationships, psychopaths are fairly unpredictable. They go from hot to cold and then back again in such a rapid pace that their partners often feel confused and sometimes threatened. Due to their lack of attachments, psychopaths are also more likely to cheat on their partners and lead a promiscuous lifestyle. When caught, they rarely take the blame and often accuse someone else. Deviant sexual urges. Sexual partners of psychopaths may describe them as adventurous. With sex being one of the more permissive deviances practiced today, psychopaths are more than happy to explore their limits and find out how far they can go or how far they can push their sexual partners. Unlike others, they can be quite aggressive in fulfilling their fantasies, therefore often pushing or cajoling sexual partners into their way of thinking. They have this amazing blend of wicked and innocence. While their wicked innocence is subtle and perceived from person to person, psychopaths do love to tell tales about their exploits. They will name drop, tell you wicked things they did in the past, the successes they've had, and various other achievements, whether they actually happened or not. More importantly, however, they suggest that while they did all these wicked things in the past, they have completely reformed and are now done doing all these things. Inaccurate emotional responses. Keep in mind that psychopaths aren't very good with emotions. In fact, they rarely experience the same emotions a typical person would feel about friends, family, and the environment in general. Nevertheless, they make sure that they can fake emotional responses in order to fit in with the group. While some psychopaths have perfected this, there are others who are still having a hard time and will sometimes fail to provide the expected emotional response. As a recipient, you might notice how their emotional responses aren't always on point. This is very subtle, and in some cases you may convince yourself that you're just imagining things. I know one psychopathic woman, for example, who fooled everyone into believing that she was innocent, including the church clergy, and later sued an innocent man for rape with all her sophisticated lies, but I still remember the strange moment when she laughed her head off when a young puppy was suffering in agony. It was just funny, she said, not knowing how to explain it. These are signs. Quick emotional changes. Emotional shallowness makes it very easy for the psychopath to switch from one mindset to another. This is why you'll often find them intensely angry 1 minute and then completely calm the next. They are unpredictable, which is stuff that often gets integrated in horror movies. While some people are definitely capable of controlling themselves, the capacity of the psychopath is amazingly uncanny. Unlike the typical person, betraying flickers or micro movement of muscles aren't discernible with psychopaths. They have a poor sense of smell. This particular characteristic has been noted after numerous studies about psychopaths. They're surprisingly clean. Psychopaths can be meticulous and will have little body odor. They like to maintain control, especially when it comes to their personal hygiene. Hence, it's not surprising for psychopaths to carry around with them an extra t-shirt, cologne, perfume, or anything that will guarantee their perfect appearance. They're good with monologues. They have the ability to create running monologues while simultaneously ignoring others. Their capacity for speech is extensive, with subjects that are usually focused on themselves. During conversations, however, a psychopath may not always be as eloquent. Words like and ah may appear as they sometimes have a hard time creating the right response to an emotional plea. Inability to describe or showcase emotions. Since psychopaths rarely feel, they can have a hard time faking emotion. This is especially true for out-of-practice psychopaths just starting to get used to society. For example, when asked about what they felt when this particular person did something, a psychopath will often have a hard time explaining this emotion. Even worse, they are unable to match what they say to the proper emotional response of their face. Since they never feel the emotion, they can't replicate it seamlessly. Contempt. Contempt is the mindset wherein a psychopath sees someone as beneath them, whether in intelligence, power, beauty, or any other factor. It is often established through glances, a rolling of the eyes, a smirk, a sneer, or any other action that is derogatory upon another person. Psychopaths are often good in hiding this, but flashes of the emotions sometimes seeps through. They like extreme sports. Remember that psychopaths form very little emotional attachments and require constant stimulation to keep them entertained. It is therefore not surprising for them to seek different kinds of thrills. A psychopath can start off by using a skateboard, to learning how to ride a dirt bike, to jumping off a helicopter in order to catch that thrill. They're not easily startled. More accurately, the surprise response of the psychopath is more low-key as opposed to other people. While there are those who might hitch their breath or jump when startled, a psychopath may merely blink as a response to the surprise. This decrease in reaction is traced to problems with the amygdala. They invade your personal space. Studies show that callous people are more likely to invade another's personal space. Strictly speaking, personal space is dictated by culture more than anything else. A psychopath will often stretch the limits of culture and invade another person's space. It may be argued that this predilection is due to the psychopath's need to manipulate or take over, essentially making it necessary for him or her to dominate the other. Note that the subtle signs above are not absolute. While some signs are present in a psychopath, others are not so. The reverse also works in that just because a person meets one or two characteristics, it doesn't make him or her a psychopath. For the most part, individuals are advised to pay close attention to the characteristics of a psychopath in order to arm themselves against possible problems. However, secure diagnosis can be done only by a professional. Chapter 9. Sneaky ways a psychopath manipulates. Psychopaths are excellent manipulators because they experience no guilt reflex and thus have no problem pushing their buttons. There have been some questions on how a psychopath can even manipulate people considering how they have no empathy and thus do not feel emotions. The answer is that, although they do not feel emotions, psychopaths are capable of recognizing them in other people. They may not always be able to replicate them successfully for themselves, but they definitely have the knack of finding them in others. This excellent reading capacity is actually a trait similarly found in narcissists. This is also the reason why psychopaths like Ted Bundy have managed to obtain numerous victims along the way. They have a very good idea of which people are most vulnerable and therefore easiest to coax into doing their bidding. It is often said that the best profilers are psychopaths. That being said, here are some of the most common methods in which a psychopath manages to get their own way. Flattery. Psychopaths can be quite forward when it comes to flattery, especially if they sense that this is the best way to get a person's approval. People who have low self-esteem respond best to flattery, and psychopaths will easily read this from a person and use the appropriate manipulating technique. Flattery in psychopaths can be terribly effective because they know exactly what traits you are most proud of and will endlessly praise you for those. They will flatter you to your face, their technique usually based on a comparison approach. This means that their flattery is usually coupled with criticism on others so that you will feel better about yourself. Like all psychopaths, however, you will find that their flattery is often skin deep, with the psychopath easily reversing his opinion when you're not around. Sexual manipulation. As mentioned, psychopaths are sexually deviant in that they happily participate in sexual adventures and love to push the boundaries in order to reach higher stimulation. They're promiscuous and understand the value of sex and how it can be used to manipulate others. This is a manipulation technique often used by psychopaths in relationships. Bear in mind that psychopaths are incapable of experiencing love and thus do not see sex as a natural extension of the emotion. Typically, sex for the psychopaths is limited to physical gratification. Shaming. Dubbed as excellent profilers, psychopaths easily know what acts or characteristics a person finds most shameful about or which ones he is most embarrassed of. They do not think twice about reminding you of these shaming instances in order to get what they want out of life. Psychopaths may use it as an insult or use it to remind you not to cross them. Oftentimes, they may use it to discourage you from doing something that would impact them. Adding to the cleverness of a psychopath is that they are sometimes capable of twisting conversations so that it looks as if they are actually doing you a favor. Staying silent. In arguments or games of persuasion, it is often said that the first person who speaks loses. This is why psychopaths sometimes make use of silence as their weapon. This is in line with their predatory nature. You'll find that predators in the wild have no problem sitting back and patiently waiting for their prey to do something stupid. The same holds true for a psychopath. Maintaining silence builds the discomfort level, making a person squirm until they eventually give in. Killer eye, or threatening actions. The silence is often compounded by the killer eye or a threatening aura exuded by the psychopath. While they can be charming if they wish, psychopaths have the ability to look at a person with a highly threatening vibe. It may feel as though they're coaxing you with their eyes or telling you to say or do something you don't want to do. Sometimes the look is compounded by an even more threatening stance or the threat of physical reprisal. Insulting. As mentioned, psychopaths are geniuses when it comes to finding those characteristics that you are embarrassed or insecure about. Thus, they are more than capable of insulting someone by referring to those things that will really hurt when noted. They may use this to discourage you, make you do something, scare you into something, or essentially manipulate you into feeling a certain emotion for their own good. Lying or pretending. Of course, one of the most powerful weapons in a psychopath's arsenal is their ability to lie convincingly or pretend that they are innocent. It is their incredible ability to lie without any twinge of remorse that makes them so convincing and thus dangerous. Evasion. They're also quite good with evasion. If a psychopath cannot directly lie about something, then they will happily evade a question by pointing out another topic or going on about other things that have little relation to the actual subject. Psychopaths can get away with this kind of technique as they distract you with another topic that you find more interesting. Chapter 10. How to deal with a psychopath. Knowing how a psychopath manipulates is often not enough to avoid the manipulation itself. Unfortunately, the psychopath is highly skillful at pushing a person's emotional button, making it hard for a person to act on logic alone. If you suspect that you are dealing with a psychopath, here are some tips on the proper way to proceed. Stop all communication. If it's possible, try to get out of the relationship quickly. It's often better to just remove a psychopath from your daily life so that any negativity will not drop off on you. Of course, there are instances where you cannot escape a psychopath from being tangled in your daily life. The psychopath may be a coworker, a colleague, or part of your social circle. If this is the case, you can choose to minimize contact with the psychopath. Always consider what you want. Psychopaths have a way of tangling the conversation or situation so that they can get what they want. However, your goal may or may not be in line with what the psychopath also wants to achieve. Thus, it's not recommended that you always go against a psychopath, since there are instances where you have to come and go, and this doesn't make you a bad person. Instead, when confronting a psychopath, always ask yourself these questions. What do I want? Try to figure out your own feelings about the matter, discarding what the psychopath told you. Instead, when confronting a psychopath, always ask yourself this question. What do I want? Try to figure out your own feelings about the matter, discarding what the psychopath told you and instead focusing on your personal preferences. Hence, if you don't want to do something, listen to that voice, no matter how persuasive the psychopath's argument may be. But if you decide to do something, make sure that it's for your own reasons rather than that of the psychopath. Do not feel sorry for them. The problem with a psychopath's sob story is that it's incredibly hard for you to figure out whether they're telling the truth or not. You may be empathetic the first time, but if you're starting to feel like this person is simply manipulating you, then try to keep your heart hard against their sob story. This can be a problematic hurdle, considering how you experience empathy what a psychopath does not. Their sob story can sometimes get to you, no matter how hard you try to disbelieve them. Whenever you're approaching a situation in which you're going to give in, remind yourself what this person did last time you gave him or her what he or she wanted. It also helps to remind yourself of what you really want. Do not make hasty decisions. A psychopath will coax you into a reaction by pushing your emotional buttons. It is therefore not a good idea to make decisions while being confronted by a psychopath. If they are trying to make you do something, take a step back and don't jump into any decisions yet. Instead, inform them that you want to think about it first. Use the psychopath's own weapon against him or her by opting for silence. Remember, the first person who talks usually loses. So opt for silence so that the psychopath can't push your buttons. Do not engage when they're angry. Do not engage when they are angry. Psychopaths can blow hot and cold, and for most people, the anger is enough to make them agree to anything the psychopath wants. You can handle this better by simply refusing to engage when the psychopath is obviously in the midst of anger. Tell them that you're willing to talk about the topic when they're no longer so angry, and this will instantly douse the fire. By doing this, you're turning the table on the psychopath and reminding him or her that they are no longer in control. Chapter 11. A look at known psychopaths. It is widely accepted that many notorious criminals today are either psychopaths or sociopaths. While there are some disagreements about the professional community, there's no question that some form of personality disorder exists to warrant their notoriety. Here's a glimpse of actual psychopaths, fictional psychopaths, and the psychopaths that may be lurking in your neighborhood. Real psychopaths. Most of the psychopaths in this list are criminals or serial killers, since they are the ones who portray the most obvious characteristics of the personality disorder. While some people who are not criminals are often suspected of being psychopaths, it's a little hard to confirm the theory since they likely won't undergo the testing required for a diagnosis. Harold Shipman. A doctor who watched his mother die from cancer, Shipman managed to kill his elderly patients by injecting them with heavy doses of morphine. It was noted that a large number of Shipman's patients died, but not enough evidence was available for his arrest. Eventually, he was caught after one of his patients affected a questionable change of will prior to her death, whereby all her money was left to Shipman. When questioned by the daughter of the deceased, it was found that the deceased actually died from an overdose of morphine. It was estimated that he killed more than 200 people before being caught, presumably with all of them leaving him something in their will. Shipman eventually committed suicide in 2004. Ted Bundy. Quite possibly one of the most infamous serial killers today, next only to Jack the Ripper, Theodore Bundy is the poster boy for the psychopath personality disorder. He was so charming that there were women who lobbied for his innocence throughout his trial and even after he escaped. He was a narcissist and overly confident to the point where he represented himself in court and even proposed to one of the women during the trial. His background is also in line with the causes of psychopathy to the point that he actually grew up believing his mother was his older sister. While Ted Bundy never knew his own father, he later on took on the surname of the man his mother eventually married. It is believed that Ted Bundy started killing at the age of 14. Aileen Wuornos. Female serial killers and psychopaths are few and far in between, but this doesn't stop them from wreaking havoc. Aileen Wuornos is considered a psychopath, although there are those who opine that she is actually a sociopath. Either way, Wuornos killed several men violently and was imprisoned for her crimes. Fictional psychopaths. Fictional psychopaths include Norman Bates from the movie Psycho and Hannibal Lecter from Silence of the Lambs. The latter is often considered a realistic take on the psychopath, as Hannibal Lecter showcases an impressive amount of intelligence and charm in order to get what he wants throughout the film. His unerring calmness, despite being locked away and held immobile, also has a very chilling effect on viewers. There are also those who argue that Sherlock Holmes is a psychopath, although evidence points more likely to sociopathy. Psychopaths around you. Criminal psychopaths are actually the unsuccessful psychopaths, so where can you find the successful ones? Although it's unlikely that anyone will happily admit to being a psychopath, studies show that there are certain professions that attract the psychopathic mind more strongly than others. Here are the top careers where sociopaths thrive. CEO. Large-scale companies likely have a psychopath CEO working in their midst. These are the CEOs who have no problem cutting the fat from the workforce in order to increase profit. Business can be a cutthroat occupation, and according to studies, around 4% of the CEO population have the characteristics of a psychopath. That's 4 times more than the psychopath population in the general public. Government or politics. Being a civil servant may seem like a bad choice for a psychopath, but they actually thrive in this occupation, especially in top positions. Psychopaths can be elected or appointed positions and will have the charm to hold on to this employment. They love the extent of the power they have when holding a high position in the government. Lawyers. This is perhaps the most non-surprising item on the list. Lawyers have always been seen as sharks, with their cutthroat approach on life and the seemingly lack of conscience. While the rule is not absolute, studies show that the law profession attracts a lot of psychopaths. Salesperson. By necessity, a salesperson is charming and capable of manipulating people in order to make a sale. It's therefore not surprising that this career calls out to the psychopath who wants to flex his manipulation muscle, while at the same time earning big in the process. More importantly, psychopaths are not content with small-time sales. Many of them will aspire to bigger sales with bigger commissions, like a car salesman. Surgeon. The medical field is highly attractive to a psychopath, specifically the job of a surgeon. Not really surprising considering how doctors are often seen in high regard by many people. They are viewed as people who hold life and death in their hands, something which will appeal to the psychopath. Surgeons in particular are of a different breed in the medical field. They're the ones who go in operating tables and make those crucial life and death situations, giving them immense power over people in the process. The gory blood and organs may not scare them either. Clergy. This is a somewhat alarming inclusion in the list, but an unfortunate fact. It is theorized that the position is attractive to psychopaths because it offers them power of a different nature to that of a doctor or a politician. After all, the clergy can claim direct connection with God himself. It also offers easy access to possible victims and puts the psychopath in a position of unerring trust. Also note that there are priests consistently being accused of sexual abuse. Think of the fact that clergy is not limited to the Catholic Church, as it can apply to all forms of religion. In fact, psychopaths are more likely to create their own sectors of religion or mega-churches, or something akin to a cult. One example is Jim Jones, who coaxed 918 of his followers to commit mass murder by drinking Kool-Aid laced with cyanide. Police officer. It's fairly obvious why psychopaths are attracted to this occupation. It's a position of power, as police officers are often hard to ignore no matter the situation. Studies have also noted that police families are more likely to experience violence either to the women or the children. Media and journalists. This refers to high-profile members of the media who see their names or images on the screen or papers every day. It requires a certain degree of narcissism to become a journalist, as the profession demands long hours and hostile confrontation with subjects. It's not surprising that some psychopaths will love this profession, as they have very little emotional involvement in anything, even when faced with various heartbreaks on a daily basis. Conclusion. Psychopaths and sociopaths are unique individuals, differentiated from society by their lack of empathy and conscience. As this book shows, not all sociopaths are a menace to society, with a majority of them seamlessly working within the community and even contributing towards its betterment. If you suspect yourself of being a psychopath or suspect someone else of this condition, this book should have given you better information on the personality disorder. But bear in mind that an exact diagnosis is only possible through a certified professional. This was Psychopath by Albert Rogers, narrated by Ramon Lopez.